Chaos in Kabul. A new reality sparks fear and anger. The city subdued, but no regrets from the US president.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
Australian allies in hiding. Advocates say time is running out to rescue them. The government
I know that support won't reach all that it should. On the ground,
Deployed to Dubbo, Defence Forces sent to regional New South Wales to help fight Delta's alarming spread there. And New Zealand locked down, the mystery COVID-19 case worrying authorities.
This is SBS World News with Janice Peterson.
Good evening. US President Joe Biden has defended his decision to pull troops out of Afghanistan while calling the anguish of trapped civilians gut-wrenching. Only 3 embassies remain operational in Kabul: Russia, China and Pakistan. Other nations are evacuating their citizens. The US has sent around 3,500 troops to secure the airport. Another 2,500 are en route. Military flights have resumed, but only after extraordinary scenes of panic. A warning some viewers may find aspects of this story disturbing.
Perched in the grass at Kabul airport, side by side, Afghan civilians and US forces. The gaping disparity in their futures about to be graphically demonstrated. A massive C-17 US military jet lumbers down the runway, surrounded by the desperate. There are thousands on the tarmac, making the calculation this is their best chance. Some clinging to the side of the fuselage, even after it takes off. Then, more disturbingly, as the plane ascends, 2 objects, presumed people, fall to the ground. Outside the airport complex, Taliban fire into the air to control the swelling crowd. Inside, where the US remains in charge, officials confirming US forces shot and killed at least 2 armed men. Eyewitnesses said the victims were ordinary people.
I just saw with my eyes 3 people, but there's more people maybe.
A total of 7 died. In central Kabul, Taliban patrol and vehicles seized from Afghan security, insisting all is well.
Everything is under control. Everything will be fine. Nobody should worry. America already spent enough time in Afghanistan. They need to leave.
The necessity of leaving, precisely the conclusion reached and the argument made by US President Joe Biden in his first public appearance since the Taliban takeover.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw US forces.
Attempting to apportion blame for the chaos.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed.
So complete, so confident the Taliban takeover, some giggled as they took to dodgem cars and the merry-go-round at a Kabul amusement park. But here, they are the only ones smiling.
The situation for now is not clear. No one can say what will happen. All the people are just lost and confused.
The Taliban spokesman says they have no reason to be.
All the people, they lead their normal life. The schools are open, the offices are open, the businessmen do their trade and business. So this is a practical example. So why they are terrified? They should not be terrified.
They are terrified, and not just the throngs at the airport. Women, including this member of parliament.
I'm afraid of myself, my life, and my freedom to work and my freedom to speak up. These are the things that I'm afraid of losing them.
At the airport, fear, and for a few, a flight. Hundreds packed inside this jet. As the strong clung to an air bridge, the increasingly distraught tried to scale airport walls. A Republican congressman who served in the US Air Force in Afghanistan expressing the growing disgust.
when you see people falling off of a C-17 aircraft, when you see more and more troops having to go in against the crush of Taliban and people being abandoned to the Taliban, this is going to make Saigon look like Disney World in comparison.
At the Pentagon, a female reporter from Afghanistan, voice quaking, overcome.
I'm very upset today because Afghan women didn't expect that overnight all the Taliban came. They took off my flag. This is my flag. And they put their flag.
The response?
Heartfelt respect to what you're going through, and we understand that.
But even if the last day's events could be rewritten, the US president is adamant.
The buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face, but I do not regret my decision.
The jarring juxtaposition of US Marines running to secure aircraft as the Taliban, in full control, declare what they say is a general amnesty. Pruluwan, SBS World News.
The UN Secretary-General has urged nations to show willingness to receive Afghan refugees, saying now is the time to stand as one. The reality, though, is the international community is scrambling to respond to the crisis in Kabul. Chief International Correspondent Ben Lewis joins me now from London. G'day, Ben. It's been 48 hours since the Taliban took over in Afghanistan. When and who will recognise them as a legitimate government, do you think?
Janice, good evening. We've already heard early word from China and from Russia that those governments there are willing to work with the Taliban, essentially recognising the situation on the ground in Afghanistan at the moment. It is a little more complicated, though, of course, for Western nations who have spent the last 20 years fighting the Taliban. We've heard from the United States and the United Kingdom, leaders there saying that they will not recognise any new government in Afghanistan if basic human rights are not fully respected. Members of the former Afghanistan government say they shouldn't expect that to happen. Afghanistan's ambassador to the United Nations no longer represents a functioning government. Instead, he speaks for those who fear what their fate holds under Taliban rule.
I'm speaking for millions of Afghan girls and women who are about to lose their freedom to go to school, to work, and to participate in the political, economic, and social life of the country. I'm speaking for thousands of human rights defenders, journalists, academics, civil servants, and former security personnel whose lives are at risk for defending human rights and democracy.
The UN Secretary-General calling for all nations to stand as one and for the Taliban to exercise utmost restraint. Few expect either of those things to happen.
The following days will be pivotal. The world is watching. We cannot and must not abandon the people of Afghanistan.
The priority for most countries is to help those who helped them. Thousands of Afghan civilians worked side by side with British troops, making them Taliban targets. These are the first to be airlifted to England since Kabul fell. The UK Defence Secretary hopes more will follow, but concedes these flights can only continue if the Taliban allows them to.
It's a really deep part of regret for me. That some people won't get back. Some people won't get back, and we will have to do our best in third countries to process those people.
Why do you feel it so personally, Mr. Wallace?
Because I'm a soldier. Because it's sad, and the West has done what it's done. And we have to do our very best, Nick, to get people out and stand by our obligations. And 20 years of sacrifice is what it is.
Yet for many Afghans fortunate enough to have been flown to safety, it's a bittersweet feeling.
Sono preoccupato per i miei colleghi che stanno morendo in Afghanistan. Stanno morendo, rischiano la vita. Rischiano la vita delle loro famiglie.
Emmanuel Macron says France will do its duty to protect vulnerable Afghans. But with an election on the horizon, he's warning there's a limit to European generosity when it comes to the impending migrant crisis.
Nous prendrons toute notre part dans le cadre d'un effort international organisé et juste. Et l'Europe ne peut pas à elle seule assumer les conséquences de la situation actuelle.
Angela Merkel has told colleagues up to 10,000 people may need to be resettled in Germany. The outgoing Chancellor admits she and NATO allies had misjudged the security situation in Afghanistan.
Wir waren immerhin fast 20 Jahre jetzt in Afghanistan. In dieser Zeit ist es nicht gelungen. Und insofern muss man sagen, dass das keine erfolgreiche Bemühung war und dass man daraus Lehren ziehen muss. Ja. Und seine Ziele auch kleiner fassen muss, glaube ich, bei solchen Einsätzen.
China's message is very different to that of the West.
我们尊重阿富汗人民的意愿和选择。
We respect the Afghan people's will and choice, said this Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson. Chinese state media using events in Kabul as a warning for Taiwan not to depend on the United States for security. It's the second day of the new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, but we still know very little about the Taliban's true plans for running the country. This morning, the streets of Kabul are relatively quiet, but a tension lingers.
As soon as we leave our compound, it's clear who is now in charge. Taliban fighters have flooded the capital. Smiling and victorious, they took this city of 6 million people in a matter of hours, barely firing a shot.
This is a sight I honestly thought I would never see. Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy compound.
People come up to them to pose for photographs.
Chanting death to America, but they seem friendly at the same time. It's utterly bizarre.
Almost everywhere we go, it seems the Taliban want to talk.
A lot of people are very frightened that you might engage in revenge attacks against security forces.
Since yesterday, we've proved that nothing will happen, and we give assurance to everyone that they will be safe, Mauli Murtaza tells us, and we follow our leaders. Once we make a promise, we stick to it. Maintaining law and order is top of that list of promises. At the presidential palace, the Taliban are now guarding the gate. They say they're here to fill the vacuum left when the government fled. But the welcoming spirit only extends so far, and my presence soon creates tension.
It's because of you. They've just told me to stand to the side because I'm a woman.
The Taliban have yet to implement their draconian version of Islamic law, but many are already preparing for it.
You can see this beauty salon and many others have actually painted over images on their storefronts of uncovered women.
Taliban commander Asad Masoud Khistani says Islamic rule will be implemented gradually.
How will you protect women? Because many women are afraid they will not be allowed to go to school, they will not be allowed to work.
The female, the woman can continue their lives, and we will not say anything for them. They can go to the school, they can continue their education, but with Islamic hijab.
So like I'm wearing?
Not like you, but covering their faces as well.
Cover the face?
Yeah.
So you mean niqab?
Yeah. Niqab.
Why do they have to cover their face?
Because it is in our Islam.
Is it in Islam, though, that you have to wear niqab?
Of course, it is in Islam.
Most ordinary Afghans we meet are in a state of shock, struggling to process the last 24 hours. Faizullah tells us his father was in the Afghan army and was killed this summer. Now he doesn't know what to do.
Yesterday I have lost everything. Like I don't feel secure in here.
You're afraid?
Huh?
You're afraid?
Yeah, I'm afraid. Because I lost my dad. I lost my mom in a Logar province like 2 months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Just I'm with my little sister. We're living at home. That's why I'm afraid from everything. It's the big problem. This is the big problem for us.
It's a feeling shared by so many. Walking along, one has a sense that the real story may be the people who are not on the streets, those too afraid to leave their homes, waiting to see what tomorrow will bring.
Remarkable reporting there by Clarissa Ward on the streets of Kabul. We have a quick update on the situation at Kabul airport at the moment. We understand that airlifts have been able to continue over the last few hours. Janice, the United States says it could take 5 weeks to get everyone out that it wants to. The United Kingdom is aiming to fly out 1,000 people a day, but yesterday they managed to get out just 200, so plenty of work still to be done on the ground in Kabul.
Thanks so much. Very important updates there from our chief international correspondent, Ben Lewis, in London. Well, the last time the Taliban governed, it was basically a pariah state. This time, 20 years on, how's it changed? We'll look at that a little later in the program. And here, concern is mounting for the safety of Afghans who worked alongside Australian forces, as the Prime Minister concedes some of them will likely be left behind. Today, SBS spoke to one of Australia's former interpreters, terrified of a future under Taliban rule and desperately pleading for a way out.
Amid the chaos at Kabul airport, an Australian ally hopes to be rescued. The former ADF interpreter rushed here in the hopes he'd get on an evacuation flight.
Please, you are not just safe over here.
But there was nothing but desperation.
Get from Taliban and US Army.
And no way out. An Australian evacuation mission left yesterday for the Middle East, with more than 250 personnel set to join a US operation. But it's unclear when it will land in Kabul to get interpreters and more than 130 Australians out of the country, amid the volatile situation in the capital.
We won't be landing into Kabul in these circumstances.
No. Advocates say time is running out to rescue allies. Lawyer and former Army officer Glenn Colomites is representing more than 200 interpreters and Kabul embassy staff who are still waiting to apply for visas.
We need them out. I don't care where they go. We need them out of Kabul, somewhere safe, and then we can get back into process clearing and processing.
Many former Australian staff waiting to be evacuated are in hiding, fearing the Taliban will find them and kill them. This man, who's been rejected for a visa, is hiding in this small room. The Prime Minister says some of them may not even make it to Australia.
I know that support won't reach all that it should. On the ground, events have overtaken many efforts. We wish it were different.
I think it's a realistic view. We won't be able to get everybody out. They won't be able to make it to Kabul airstrip.
But it's a frightening prospect for those who worked in Afghanistan, including former embassy guards waiting to leave.
The Prime Minister, and he said that everyone will not be able to rescue, which has made everybody very disappointed and break everyone's heart.
A disappointment shared by Paul Johnston, who trained several Afghan embassy guards.
They've had enough time now, and there's been enough warnings given to them, so whoever was, advising the Prime Minister, they've been asleep at the wheel for this whole time. It's been a monumental failure by people in our government to foresee what was going to happen. They've had 20 years of experience with the Taliban to know exactly what these people were going to do.
And please send the evacuation team as soon as possible and save everyone's lives, and everybody will be very thankful from your great government.
The Prime Minister says he's optimistic the evacuation will happen, but the focus is to ensure it's done safely. Rashida Yousafzai, SBS World News.
And that story was produced in collaboration with SBS Dari's Mujib Munib. And SBS political correspondent Pablo Vinales joins me now from Canberra. Good evening, Pablo. We've just seen criticism that the government didn't act soon enough in Afghanistan, but how far back does this go?
Janice, good evening to you. You know, some within the coalition were raising concerns about this back when the government announced that it was closing its embassy in Kabul. That was in May earlier this year, so it gives you a sense of when the red flags were raised. Now, we just heard from former Defence Chief Peter Lay in Rashida's story, and he also said today that clearly the intelligence that Allied troops were relying on was flawed, and that is perhaps evident in Joe Biden's admission today that the situation in Afghanistan happened much quicker than anticipated, Janice.
And Pablo, what implications does this have for Afghans living here in Australia at the moment?
Janice, you know, some 4,200 Afghans are currently on temporary protection visas in Australia, and you can just imagine the fear they would have, not only for their loved ones back in Afghanistan, but the idea that they could be sent back to the country. Now, the Immigration Minister today said that no visa holder would be returned while, quote, the security situation there remains dire. The Prime Minister today reaffirming that, but Labor, the Greens, refugee groups say that is not good enough.
The idea that there's something temporary about people, particularly the Hazara community and others, that at some stage they'll be going back to Afghanistan is just not real. And we need to give them the certainty of Australian citizenship on a permanent basis.
We have no plans to be returning people back to those places where there is such terrible unrest, and they'll be able to remain here under those circumstances, under the visas they're currently on.
Now, the Prime Minister resisting that pressure there. SBS World News has been told that instead of allowing or increasing the intake of the humanitarian intake for Afghans also trying to get to Australia, what will happen instead is that there is a plan for a significant chunk of the existing program now to be set aside for Afghan nationals. There is a big vacancy given the fact that the pandemic has seen less people moving to Australia. Janice.
Thanks so much. Our political reporter Pablo Vinales reporting from Canberra. Coming up, growing fears after the unfolding COVID-19 outbreak in Western New South Wales, with the ADF set to be deployed to the region to help boost vaccination numbers. Also, bad weather hampers recovery efforts in Haiti following a deadly earthquake. And New Zealand goes into a 3-day lockdown following a COVID-19 case in the community.